What is going on, YouTube? So this is my first official video release as promised. Today is 10/31 Halloween night, and I'm gonna break down my life story. This is gonna be kind of a Cliff Notes version, kind of give y'all an idea of the things I've been through, you know what I'm saying, some of the challenges that I've encountered throughout the years, and kind of what my plan is for the next 3 to 5 years. So as y'all know, this is J Meds. This is my official channel release. You know, growing up, I grew up in a two-parent household. From the outside looking in, for the most part, I guess it would look like any normal upbringing. You know what I'm saying? I grew up in a city in Northern California, but my house was anything but functional. You know what I'm saying? We live in a world that's very, very dysfunctional. Foundationally, we're dysfunctional, right? So anything that follows after that's going to be dysfunctional. My household was no different. You know, my dad worked all the time, you know what I'm saying? When he was home, he was, you know, a little bit tired, and, you know, he did a great job of providing and putting a roof over our head. We didn't have all the bells and whistles, and my family definitely had their financial struggles. But I'm thankful for, you know, what my dad did for me and what he continues to do and how he supports me as just a human being here in 2022. My mom, that's a whole different story now. She definitely was more concerned with what my dad had going on, and, you know, wasn't the most loving mother, you know what I'm saying? Didn't really give me that emotional support. What I can say is, growing up as a child, the woman that did show me unconditional love was my dad's mother, which is my grandmother. She showed me exactly what it means to love somebody unconditionally. And I'll never forget that. I'll never forget her. You know, God bless her soul. She's in heaven right now, and I know she's looking down on me, and definitely one of my guardian angels today for sure. So, you know, growing up as a child, you know what I'm saying, we moved around a couple times. I had some stability from first grade all the way up until, you know, I would say 10th grade. You know, I played sports. I did what most normal kids did, you know what I'm saying? But I never really truly felt like I fit in, I guess, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Elementary school, you know, 5th and 6th grade, that's when I kind of started getting a little bit, I guess, noticing things were a little bit different. I started, you know, having a little bit of, you know, a couple little fist fights here and there, a couple little challenges. But the city I grew up in, for the most part, you know, wasn't that violence ridden, I'll say, right? Like I said, my family definitely had their economic challenges, but we weren't in a city that was, you know, like I said, they had a lot of violence around me, although there was things going on, and there were some lives that were lost in the process, but it wasn't an everyday thing. When I got to junior high, things started changing. You know what I'm saying? I kind of noticed more, you know, people started grouping up, and it's almost like, you know, really looking back on it now as an adult and what I've experienced, it's almost like a prison yard, right? You got the, you know, the skaters, the white dudes, you got, you know, the gangbangers, you got, you know, the African Americans, you got all these different, this all dynamic in a public school setting. And in junior high, I still wasn't losing my way per se, but I started noticing these things, and I guess I was getting more rambunctious in my juvenile delinquency. And so that was definitely challenging. As I got into high school, my freshman year, things were okay for the most part. I still had my innocence about me. From 8th grade into my freshman year, I actually lost a lot of weight. So when I got to my freshman year in high school, a lot of the girls that I went to junior high with just didn't even recognize me because I looked that significantly different. But I was a nice kid at that point still. I wasn't necessarily corrupted. My innocence wasn't gone. And I was able to get through my freshman year for the most part without any too many hiccups. I get to my sophomore year, and that's when the whole game changed, right? I definitely started doing more delinquent, I guess, juvenile delinquent activities. I got into graffiti at that point. And, you know, I've always been of the mindset, go hard or go home. So when I started doing graffiti, you know, I wanted to be the best at it. And that carried me through my, you know, I was sophomore, junior year, until I was kicked out of high school, right? When I was kicked out of high school, things kind of took a turn for the worse. I definitely started engaging in more behaviors that were considered high risk, hanging around more, I guess, high risk individuals, so to speak. And found myself getting arrested at 17 with a knife in my pocket for, at the time, someone had got murdered at one of the local high schools. And so, school police were on high alert. I had got kicked out at that point. So I'm walking to the store to go get a burrito for lunch. And I got rolled up by TASS. They slammed me up against the wall. And this is how crazy it was. They slammed me up against the wall and they're trying to ask me, what am I doing now? Yada, yada. I'm like, I'm not kicked out of school. I shouldn't even be. I'm just going to get something to eat. And at that time, my mom happened to be driving in the parking lot of the store that I was being hemmed up in. She jumps out the car. What are you guys doing to my son? One of the cops got smart with her. I turned around and said, what the fuck? Don't talk to my mom like that. Slammed me on the wall even harder. And I ended up getting arrested and found myself in juvenile hall. I ended up getting released a few days later, but I did get sentenced to 30 days in juvenile hall. I spent my 18th birthday there. And it was just an introduction, I guess, into kind of the underground lifestyle, so to speak, we'll say. From that point forward, what do they say? You become a product of your environment. And so, being around, you take someone like myself, who at that time I would consider was a low risk person, put them in a high risk environment, and that individual, more often than not, is going to adapt to the high risk behaviors that are kind of surrounding, right? And so what do they call that? Systems theory. So the system now that I was engaging in was a lot more high risk. So I graduated from writing on walls and graffiti to now let's start gangbanging, right? And that took me down a whole nother rabbit hole and ended up ultimately landing me in state prison. From 18 to 23, I was maybe on the streets 6 months. You know what I'm saying? I got caught up for a few different cases. I got caught up for graffiti at 18. I spent 3 months in jail. Got out for a few months for that case and ended up catching an assault with a firearm. Found myself fighting that case for about 10 and a half months. I got lucky because the witnesses' statements and, you snitch ass niggas know who you are. Snitch ass motherfuckers know who you are. Let me rephrase that. But ultimately, I ended up having to do about 10 and a half months on that because the case was kind of shaky. The evidence wasn't all there. My parents were able to get me a lawyer. I ended up only doing 10 and a half months. If I had caught that case a year later, that was when the trigger lock and, all those, you use a gun to commit a crime, you discharge a firearm during the commission of a crime, it would have been a 10-year mandatory minimum, right? At the time they were trying to give me 17 years. That was the first offer. I remember the head district attorney coming into court. A lot of my boys were in court during this time. If y'all remember, your boy fell down in the middle of court. It was just a lot of scenes going on at that time, but that's how I was living, And so ultimately, I found myself in state prison. At that time, reception was San Quentin. From San Quentin, I was transferred to Jamestown. While spending time in Jamestown, I was on the level 1 yard. You know what I'm saying? Or excuse me, I went to the level 2 yard. There was a lockdown in the level 1 yard, so they tried to move me over there. And I think it was as kind of like, and now looking back on it, it was a way for them to kind of gauge to see what was going to happen. And I remember getting sent to the level 1 yard, and some of the older cats were like, so what you plan to do when we come off lockdown? I'm like, well, I'm gonna just get off where I'm mad at. I kind of knew what the game was, and I wasn't gonna, be the one that was caught up, right? So I'm gonna do what I got to do. And they ended up moving me back to the 2 yard. We ended up getting in a riot. You know what I'm saying? I ended up in the hole for about 3 months. And I remember that time. I never remember feeling so low. My cellie was from another. We had some good times. I had cellies from a few different cities. And it was kind of one of those kind of growing up kind of moments, right? It was like, okay, we got in this little riot. There was 80 motherfuckers, and when you get in a riot in prison, I don't give a fuck if it's a level 1, 2, 3, or 4. Obviously, level 3 and 4, it's a lot more serious. But you can cut that tension with a knife, right? And so, but anyways, I ended up paroling from a lockdown, fortunately, from a level 3 yard. And I found myself, kind of more caught up in the game as a person, because that's what I adapted to survive prison, right? So, I had to go through the motions. That took me a good 5 to 7 years to kind of work through. I was doing a little music. I was just doing a bunch of different things that were what I would consider high risk behaviors and putting myself in predicaments that potentially could have, cost me my life, caused me to get life in prison, and just a bunch of other shit, right? And so, there came a point when I had to make a decision, and things were starting to get a little more hectic. I was starting to get a little uncomfortable. I had my first son. My son's mom, me and her have had our challenges, and we were on the verge of breaking up, and she's pregnant with my second son. So some things had been going on at that point in time, and I had to make a change. So I ended up deciding to move right to a different area, a different city, and start working on myself. And it took me a couple years to kind of go through the kinks in that with that version of myself. She was going to school at that time and came home with the brochure, and I looked at it and I was like, man, I can do this, right? It's for a paralegal program it's out here in Northern California. And so I said, I'm gonna go ahead and give this a try. So I applied for school. At that time, I was really, really green as far as knowing the education process, obviously getting my GED when I was locked up, and now knowing that I always had the ability, I was just bored as fucking school, right? So I ended up going back to school, and I got my, AA and paralegal studies, right? I had these big dreams to maybe potentially be an attorney, right? I was like, man, this shit's kind of coming to me easy. I really enjoyed the law. I loved arguing, arguments. I just, I made it like a little competition when I was in school. And but then I started looking into it a little bit further, and I was like, man, I had an assault with a firearm. That was a violent strike, you know what I'm saying? And at that time, I was still just wasn't really aware of all the different opportunities and things that were available for folks re-entering society after mistakes. Even though it had been years, I still wasn't, fully healed from that lifestyle, so to speak. And so I decided to go a different route. I was like, what can I do to use these experiences to potentially, help others? And so I found myself in another school program pursuing my bachelor's degree in human services, and I ended up completing that. And so, that at that time, I ended up getting my first job in the field itself, working with AB 109 probation reentry folks, right? Folks that were from a similar place as myself, you know what I'm saying? And kind of going through the motions of that, and always wanting to, help others and minimize the impact, the negative impact that certain lifestyles will create, right? I'm not anybody that's going to say, gangs this, gangs that, right? Because I don't believe there's nothing wrong with wanting to be a part of something or belonging to or being proud to be from a neighborhood, right? That's not what the problem is, Sometimes it's what we do to carry out that responsibility, right? And, for me, my responsibility to my family, to my kids, definitely outweighed any of that. But ultimately, because of my unhealed trauma, right, and some of the, anger and resentment that I held for my son's mom, for just, even towards myself in reality, it took some time for me to kind of work through those kinks. And, I struggled with alcoholism, I struggled with just, cocaine use and different things over the years that have, created additional hardships. Getting a DUI, as twisted as my mind is, right? A DUI, I'm like, man, at least, I ain't facing prison time. I ain't and it was no big deal. But even then I'm thinking like, fuck, it took my license. It cost, thousands of dollars. It created a lot of additional hardships that I'm still paying the price for at this very moment, right? And there's been a couple of those over the years, but I say that just to say that, and this is the Cliff Notes version, y'all. But what I've learned through all of this is that through all my transitions in life, what it's done is it's given me a perspective that I think is very useful. You know what I'm saying? I'm not somebody who is, that has a blind allegiance to one way or the other. In today's, political realm, it's just socialized, legalized, socially acceptable gangbanging, right? You got Democrats, Republicans, blue state, red states. It's a whole nother. And so what happens, I think, is society as a whole kind of follows, what we're led to believe is the way of life. And so I say that all to say this, y'all, is that over the years, I've made plenty of mistakes. You know what I'm saying? Mistakes that have costed me the people that I care about most, the relationship with my son's mom. I'm not saying that it's been all my fault, because she had some things to contribute to that equation as well. But ultimately I got to be responsible and take accountability for my actions. The relationship with my children that I'm still trying to heal to this day, right? As a result of some of my, poor decisions and just behaviors that weren't the most, positive, right? But that's not to say that, like I said, it always takes two to tango. And, but I think the difference nowadays, especially here in 2022, is my willingness to look at myself, my willingness to kind of process my experiences and ultimately hold myself accountable. And that's what I do today, right? It takes a lot of courage, I think, to be able to get on something like this type of platform. And I know there's a lot of y'all out there doing this, that sharing kind of their experience and what they've been through. And for me, this is all about education, right? I'm 2 classes away plus 300 hours of internship to getting my master's in social work through Cal State East Bay, right? I'm somebody who has definitely, made some changes in my life, but even those changes, I still carry the wounds. I still carry the emotional trauma, right? And as men, we're taught to kind of keep those feelings in. Don't talk about your feelings, and you got to be a rock. And what do many of us do as a result? We get home after work, we drink a six pack to forget about what we're dealing with, so we don't have to face the reality or face our true selves, right? And that's what it was for me for many years. But at this moment in time, y'all, not saying I haven't had hiccups, because, the damage is real. And I got to sometimes look at myself and be like, fuck, you caused all this. Or let me rephrase that. You caused a lot of this, but I'm not the only one to blame. And so the purpose of this channel, the purpose of this video, these videos that are going to follow are going to be to kind of break down the experiences and share, my thoughts around some of the mistakes I made and why I made them. At the end of the day, education is packaged up life experience for sale. That's as layman terms as I can put it. And, you definitely learn, how to write, how to, critically think, you know what I'm saying? But there's a lot of shit that we learn in school that just ain't relevant or doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. As a father, my only desire for my children is that they make a conscious effort, that they show up on time, that they're able to meet deadlines, right? And do the best you can, let the chips fall where they may. Whether they get straight A's or not, that's irrelevant, because none of those shit matters in the big scheme of things, right? It's the lessons that you learn. It's the things you take from that education experience, but more important, it's the experience itself. And, I'm desperately working, unfortunately, with the court system as we speak to get some of these things restored. You know what I'm saying? Bless my son's mother's heart. I know she loves my babies to death. But it's unfortunate that we can't find a happy medium and work through a lot of the challenges that we're dealing with at this current time. Like I said, some of it's my doing, some of it's her doing. What did I say? There's always 2 sides to every story. Then there's the truth, right? And I think accepting the truth sometimes is the hardest thing for people to do, but you have to do it you have to do it with humility and compassion, but more importantly, a willingness to find a happy medium. And that's where we've struggled. And so at this very point, in time, I currently work with previously incarcerated or, folks that are discharging from the criminal justice system. My job is to help them get stabilized, come up with a game plan to transition out of the criminal justice system and ultimately reduce recidivism and prevent them from going back to jail and or prison, right? It's real challenging work, but I'm a firm believer in the mindset. And so as a human being in 2022 and the end of 2022 and moving forward in 2023, my only desire and goal, y'all, is to see people maximize their potential. We can't go back and change the past. We can't go back and change anything that's happened. But one thing I can say for myself is I live with a lot of regret. I live with a lot of shame. I've left a lot of my potential in the past because of my poor decision making, because of having an identity crisis as a young person, not knowing, I wasn't, I don't speak Spanish as a, Latin, Hispanic male, whatever you want to call me, but I wasn't white enough for the white folks and I wasn't brown enough for the brown folks. So I've experienced racism on both ends of the spectrum, and it's an interesting thing. When I really break it down, I can trace my ancestry back to the 1600s on both sides of on my dad's side of the family. And I always say that I had one side of my family that came and slaughtered my other family. And somehow through that, my lineage was developed, and here I am today, right? I don't believe in anything that's about division, anything that separates people, because truly we are the same when it comes down to it. All people. I don't give a fuck where you're from, your socioeconomic status, what your family dynamic is. At the end of the day, all people want to feel heard, they want to contribute, and they want to be able to do their part to make the world they live in better. Quality of life, right? That's what we're all seeking. I don't give a fuck who you are, whether you're homeless on the corner. That's somebody that has a lot of trauma and damage. How do we heal that person? How do we embrace that person and include them, right? That's what I'm about today. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of that's my life experience and what I've been through, that's created this, this level of empathy that is hard, that I found over the years has been hard to match in this field, what we call human services, social work, whatever you want to call it. Most people come into it for the right reasons, you know what I'm saying, but maybe lack the life experience and or had struggles in life that give them that kind of level of understanding and reason for doing what they do. And so with that being said, y'all, this is my first video. Please give me a like, give me a subscribe. You know what I'm saying? Well, I'm going to be breaking these down, breaking down portions of my story a little bit more in depth, talking about some of the, it's just going to get deep, y'all, right? But a lot of it's going to be, like I said, to give education, to help people understand what this journey of life truly is. And we only get one crack at it. And if I can prevent one young person, a 20-something, 30-something-year-old person, you know what I'm saying, from, making some of the same errors that I did over the years and helps them change the trajectory of their life and ultimately get the most out of what they got left to give the world, right? Because at the end of the day, we are in this together. Then this whole video and this whole purpose of doing these, this channel was worth it to me. So I look forward to seeing y'all. This is going to be a journey. Like I said, I'm going to break down, like I said, social distortions. I'm going to talk about my relationship fails. I'm going to talk about parenting. I'm going to talk about, some of the social construct in today's world. This shit's going to get broken down in through my lens, right? I'm not saying I'm right, not saying I'm wrong, right? All I'm saying is this is how I perceive it, and this is how I see the world, and this is a result of my experiences, right? What I've learned in my MSW program is systems theory was the best, I guess, part of the program so far for me personally. And that's because you realize that we operate in different systems, and all these systems that we operate in, whether it's a family system, whether it's a street system, whether it's an education system, whether it's a work system, whether it's whatever systems that we encounter, these things create how we view the world and how we interact with the world. And one of the things I'm desperately out to change, and for myself specifically, is that no matter where I'm interacting, what system I'm engaging with, I'm gonna be the same motherfucker. I'm gonna be the same person. And because this is me every day, right? And it takes years for people to truly find their voice and figure out who the fuck they are and how they want to present in the world, right? As children, we're taught to kind of keep our mouth shut, kind of fall in line and speak when spoken to, kind of a thing, right? How many kids, how many people really have their own identity? And a lot of us are living for what other people think and how they view us instead of really being ourselves and really embracing the uniqueness that we all truly have. I really believe that. So thanks for coming to my channel, y'all, and checking out this first video. I did go on a tangent. That's a Cliff Note version of my life, what I've been through and what it's going to look like moving forward. But I assure you this channel is going to be worth it. Come back, like, subscribe, and we're going to check in next week. God bless y'all.